You know, it's still kind of amazing to me that everyone still shows up. With my other school, we, you know, like everyone, we're all online, and I'm lucky to get like maybe 3 people in a class. um, but yeah, I guess that's a big difference there. Anyway, today we are doing functional, functional activities and sports. Um, this should be a pretty quick rundown here for you. But again, what I wanted to go over real quick with you is just kind of the due dates and what's kind of going on the rest of the, well, I guess semester. So today is your last class, like active class day, I guess you would say. What I mean by that is that we're not, I mean, I'll be here next Thursday. So I'll send you out a Zoom link, and I'll be here next Thursday from 8 till whenever. If you have any questions or you need any help, especially with your final project, but you don't have to show up to that. It's really only if you want any kind of like live support or anything like that with actual visual feedback. So again, you don't have to come next week if you don't want to. We're not going to cover anything new. And then as far as turning in your work, so typically for labs, your final due date for everything, I believe, is like the 21st or the 22nd. So it's like just a couple days after. I've decided that I'm not going to give any late penalties for anything that you need to turn in. So anything really from gate on, actually, you know, anything from the spine on, I'll say, I'm not going to give you any late penalties for, but you do have to have everything in really by like 19th or 20th. And it's just because then we have to turn in final grades. That's the big thing there. Now, if you say like need an incomplete or something like that, then, you know, that changes things. But make sure you get all your work done by the 19th. If for some reason you can't submit it, or you can't submit anything to the actual assignment page in LoudCloud, you can send it to me on an email, you can send it to me in the private forum, whatever you want to do, just make sure I get it somehow. But that's that. A couple of you have already done your demonstration of skills, and that's gone pretty decent. Just want to kind of reiterate what you need to do with that. So remember, you're picking yourself 3 range of motion tests and 3 manual muscle tests. What I would really appreciate you doing is when you are doing each test, say, I'm doing or we're doing this manual muscle test or this range of motion test kind of thing. So just kind of announce what test you're doing on what body part before you do it. Remember, for the ranges of motion, you don't have to do, or you don't have to state any of these things here. So if you do the test correctly, you have done all those things. The only thing you need to state is your measurement and what the norms are. So the obtains accurate measurement and correctly reports measurement, that's going to be what you state that the number you actually got from your participant, and correctly reporting the norms is what you have to have known. I've seen the students so far use homemade goniometers, and there was one that had a phone app that was actually looking pretty neat. I don't know which app it was. I really honestly haven't looked into it at all, but either way has really gone well so far. So again, you just need to be able to state these things here as far as the range of motion. For the manual muscle test, you're going to need to state these 5 things here. So what you're going to need to do for your manual muscle test, again, you're picking out your own. And again, for all of them, you need one upper body, one lower body, and one spine manual muscle test and range of motion test. So 6 total. The positioning, partner, identifying correct muscle, palpate muscle, perform test correctly, hand placement correct, all that you will do if you do the test correctly. What you need to state is, first off, you need to state the grade. You need to identify the plane of motion, so where the movement is occurring, not necessarily what the muscle does. So for example, if you were doing, say, let's say shoulder flexion, and you're talking about the origin and insertion of the deltoid, you can't say that the deltoid then does, say, shoulder abduction or shoulder extension, because you're testing shoulder flexion. So hopefully that makes some sense for you. But you have to state the action of the muscle relative to what the test is you're performing. So something that has multiple functions, which most muscles do, you want to state the action of the muscle that's relevant to the test you're doing. So again, if you're doing, let's say, you know, ankle dorsiflexion, you're not going to tell me that tibialis anterior does ankle inversion, because that's not relevant to dorsiflexion. And really, if you get the action of the muscle incorrect, that's kind of really on you, because the action of the muscle is pretty much stated in the manual muscle test name. So no sympathies on that one. But like I said, for the most part, everything's been really good so far. All right, so getting into today's stuff. There's a few things that you're going to need to do in terms of what the assignment is. So obviously you're not going to have all the members here, so ignore those there. And don't worry about these pre-measurement guesses. But what you're going to do is you're going to be walking up the stairs, you're going to be walking down the stairs, and you're going to be measuring hip range of motion, knee range of motion, ankle range of motion. So pretty straightforward there. If you don't get perfect numbers, don't worry about it. But I just want to see that you're able to make some sort of intelligible measurement of yourself while you're doing that. If you want to measure someone else, like, you know, parent, family member, friend, whatever, perfectly fine. Go ahead and go for it. You'll need to do, like I said, both the up and down the stairs, 3 questions to answer there. Then you'll be doing a posture assessment, but you're going to be doing it from a sitting perspective. So we'll be going over that today. And then you're going to be doing this upper extremity assessment, where you don't have to actually do these things, but what you're going to do is you're going to state during these different everyday movements, or these what we call ADLs, or activities of daily living, you're going to state what the joint motion is that happens at each of these joints. And then you're going to have to look up yourself what the range of motion is that's needed. So for the top part, even if your numbers are like off, I'm not going to count that against you. I'm going to be grading the question. So every one of the responses, I'll be grading on you there. The measurements for the desk assessment, again, if your numbers are off a bit, I'm not too worried about it, but you know, they should be relatively in the ballpark. So for example, if you state that you know, if you're elbow flexion where you're resting on the desk, so what that would kind of look like is if my arms are just kind of like, you know, this. If you tell me that this is, I don't know, 120 degrees when it's clearly not, like that's pretty close to 90, that's going to be wrong. But like I said, if you tell me that is 100 degrees when it's 90 degrees, okay, I can get you there. Make sure you answer those. The upper extremity assessment, that one you'll need to also answer as well. And then the sports analysis. We've done really the kick and soccer kick analysis already. So you guys can go ahead and delete that one and just do the baseball analysis. So hopefully that's fair enough for you there. So for the sports analysis, just do the baseball one. You don't have to worry about the soccer one. If you want to do it, great. By all means, go do more work for yourself, but you don't have to. All right, so any questions on what you need to turn in so far? All right, perfect. All right, so let's get into this stuff here today. Was it week 1 or week 2, we did the stair climbing lab in terms of calculating your force production and speed, all that good stuff. Now, what you're just going to do is you're going to be going, just walking up and down the stairs. And what you're assessing here is your actual range of motion. So pretty simple, straightforward. There's your norms. It's pretty self-explanatory. Take a step, you know, stand and measure your ankle range, knee range, hip range. That's about it. So nothing too complicated with that. Now, the FMS or functional movement screen, this is something you should have covered in, I believe it's the 200 class, I want to say. It's either 200 or 202. I forget there. But I just wanted to give you just a quick overview of this, just kind of as almost a refresher here, because this is really one of the most important series of tests you can do or assessments you can do to assess for potential injury prevention or for any sort of anomalies you can see with someone. So functional movement screen is 7 basic movements. You have a 0 to 3 point scale. If you get a grade of 14 or lower, then you are considered to be at a greater risk of injury, which, you know, not the greatest thing there. The overhead squat or the deep squat, this one is really kind of the catch-all for virtually everything with the body. If you don't remember anything else about doing any sort of fitness assessments, just remember this one. So if you can remember the overhead squat, that's simple. Then you can do really everything here. Now, what they're showing here for this guy would be a grade of a 3. The major thing you'll see with anyone that gets a 0 is they report pain. So anytime you report pain, even if you did it absolutely perfect, you automatically get a 0 for the test. And that's because pain's a sign of injury. If you have pain doing something, it doesn't matter if you could do it correctly, but it's going to potentially further injure you. So pain is definitely not a good sign here. With the deep squat, what you're looking for here, and granted, we're looking from the side, you should look at this from a side view and also an anterior and posterior view. For the side view, the big things you'll note are head, shoulders, and trunk. So for these, you would be seeing an excessive lean forward of the head, lean forward of the elbows and a lean forward of the trunk here. Those are the main things you would see. You typically don't see people going into extension on this. And it's really because flexion is the position of deformity. So you think of, like, say, fetal position, you know, you're in a flexed position with kind of your whole body. Your body likes to go into flexion a lot more than likes to go in extension. Just even take a look at yourself or feel how you kind of sit when you do sit. You know, you don't really, most people don't sit like leaning back all the way with their neck back in neutral position. You kind of lean forward. So everything goes really forward into flexion when you're talking about these things here. Extension is usually something you don't really ever see. If you saw extension, it's usually a major compensation there. Oh, and if you were looking forward or backward, what I would be seeing is I would see my knees either come out or in. I would see my feet go out or in. And then potentially I would see a lateral tilt either between the C-spine or the thoracolumbar spine. If you can't get into the below parallel, that typically means that you have either weak glutes, you have tight quads, or you have a tight hamstrings or weak hip flexors. There we go. Doing this whole, it's called the lower cross. You have an upper cross and a lower cross. So what typically happens is you have tightness on one end and you have weakness on the opposite end. So that's typically how a cross works in your body. So you have the upper cross, which is your neck and your shoulders. Your lower cross is your hips and your torso. For the hurdle step, this one's pretty straightforward. All you're doing is stepping over the hurdle. Now, you set this hurdle up to go to the bottom of your patella. So you should be able to clear this without, say, tilting over, without, say, kicking your leg to the side, without this bar moving, without your head moving either way, and without hitting the bar there. So that one's pretty straightforward. The inline lunge, same thing. This is all about really just doing a lunge with balance. The arm positioning is you're holding the dowel behind your back, straight up and down. It doesn't matter what your position of your hands is. If you want your right or left overhand, that doesn't really matter so much. But what that's doing is to give you an alignment there, so you're not moving side to side. All right, shoulder internal external rotation. This one you don't necessarily have to do with, you know, the actual movement screening, but all you're trying to do here is you're trying to reach behind your back and get one hand to touch the other, and you can see how great my flexibility is there. Ideally, you should be pretty much, you know, pretty close together there. So you want to be within one hand length. So a hand length typically is going to be around about a foot, roughly. I'm sorry, not a foot, about 6 inches. If I measure my hand, mine's actually about 8. So look at that. But I know I'm nowhere close to being that. You know, after having shoulder surgery, I've never really actively tried to get my shoulder flexibility back. Shoulder internal external rotation is important for your overhead throwing athlete. So we will look at that here at the end. Straight leg raise, pretty self-explanatory. Can you stick your leg up in the air without bending your knee, kind of thing? So this is just to test both your flexibility in your hamstrings and also with your hip flexors. Push-up test, again, pretty straightforward here. This is testing both core stability and it's also testing upper body strength. Now, your rotary stability, this one here is the kind of the great equalizer. So I've included this little bit here on it. If you look at rotary stability here and how this is done, to get a grade 3, you have to be able to lift both the same arm and same leg straight back. Now, the grading for it, you see here, it says that you can perform 1 correct repetition while keeping the torso parallel to the board and your elbow and knee in line with the board. So you're gonna have to do a slight lean over. I remember going to a CEU course years ago, and it was on baseball players. So like the Cleveland Indians were the kind of sponsors of it. And the CSCS for the Cleveland Indians said that in the something like 5-10 years he had been with the team, he had only ever seen 2 people that got a perfect 3 score on the FMS or for the rotary stability test, because what you see for many people is this: they are not parallel with the board. And it makes sense, because unless you have a core of steel, you know, you're going to have to rotate to maintain balance. So it's relatively easy to get a grade of a 2 on this, but getting a grade of 3, you kind of do have to be a bit of a Greek god to do that. And then what you do is you extend and then you touch your elbow to your knee and extend again. Now he's doing multiple reps, you don't have to do that, you just do once. This second part here, the modified version, is what most everyone does. I'm sorry, not that bit there. All right, so the modified version here, you kick opposite arm, opposite leg out. So reach right hand out, right leg or left leg out. Now, if you notice, perfectly straight back. That is how you should look if you're getting a perfect score on this. So you can't, I shouldn't say you can't, but it's very, very difficult to get a grade of a 3 on this, just because if you ever tilt to the side like that, that is not a passing test. So if you can do this, if you can keep your back straight while doing same arm, same leg, you have essentially mastered core stability. But then again, if you can do that perfectly, most likely you are some sort of a professional athlete or a professional bodybuilder, something like that, because you have to have like the absolute best strength to be able to do that. So there's your quick run through of your FMS screens. All right, ergonomics. Whenever you talk about ergonomics, it comes from the Greek for but pretty much we're just talking about how do we have correct body placement while we are sitting. So sitting is actually harder on your body than standing if you're doing it for relatively longer periods. Now, if you're standing all day, you're going to get sore and whatnot. But that's just because you have to support your whole body weight. But if you're sitting, you're putting a lot more stress on your lower back because you have more of a pressure point on your ischium. So remember the 2 little bones that stick underneath your butt. You have a lot of pressure right on them. So like when you're sitting on your butt, you don't like sit on the full, it doesn't flatten out or it gives you a full lot of surface area. You primarily sit on the ischium there, or your ischial bones, so that it creates almost like a pressure point. And then that in turn, if you really just kind of sit stable, you can kind of feel it in your low back where that strain is. Now, there's a few things that you want to be mindful of with ergonomics. Primarily, your biggest thing is going to be with the spine. And there's two areas of the spine that are most affected, and that's going to be lumbar spine and cervical spine. For the most part, like I was saying earlier, many people, if you're sitting at a desk, many people have this lean forward with their neck. And doing that really causes a lot of strain on the C-spine. So this is kind of the biggest reason why you would have neck pain, is because sitting like this, whereas you should be, and it's even just really difficult just to even do that, but having your ears over your shoulders, over your hips, that's a pretty difficult thing to get there. But that is proper alignment. So one of the ways to do that, or to help correct for that, because most everyone is going to be at least in cervical flexion while they're sitting, is to do things called neck retractions. What that means is that you move your neck back. So you're essentially doing a retraction. Like if you retracted your scapula, you're pulling it backwards, you can retract your C-spine by kind of giving yourself a double chin. And that'll help not only give you better alignment, but it'll also help to kind of stretch you out more too. The other area with the spine and the lumbar spine has more to do with where you sit in regards to kind of lateral flexion. So normally, and I've tried to do a lot better at this, is sitting straight up and down, where, you know, easiest way to measure it are shoulders in alignment kind of thing. And if you do something where you're leaning, and I did this for like roughly 5 years as a health coach, I sat like this for most of my day. And I went to a chiropractor, I think it was, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but I ended up having I have a 4-degree deviation in my lumbar spine now. And that's primarily attributed to sitting in this position for hours a day for years at a time kind of thing. So if you have poor posture, you can change the positioning of your spine, typically for the worse there. The last bit here with ergonomics is you really want to look at hand placement. Now, most everyone is going to be typing something, you know, use your keyboard to type. And when you use a keyboard, your wrist placement should be into slight extension. If you try to type in flexion, like if you have wrist flexion, that's going to feel really weird on you. But the problem with it is if you're typing and my wrists are positioned so they're actually on, like making contact with the desk. So you want to have them actually elevated off the desk. Problem with that is that makes your shoulders work harder. So doing that puts more strain on your shoulders. And I mean, it might actually make them a little bit stronger, but still at the same time, you don't necessarily want to have to do that. But by putting the wrist directly on the desk, you're putting more pressure right on the carpal tunnel. So by putting more pressure there, you can actually set up yourself for having more carpal tunnel-esque symptoms. This kind of keyboard they're showing here is where the hands are positioned more like this. And that way, even if I put my hand straight down, now my impact is on the side of my wrist, not the front of my wrist. It's off the carpal tunnel here, it's on the carpal tunnel here. That's really where your big thing goes there. Just like we talked about with your static posture last week, what you're looking for is anything that looks wrong. That's pretty much it. Now, the way they're showing here is a little bit misleading. This and this is not bad by itself. If your legs are out, stretched out, you have your feet in plantar or dorsiflexion, that doesn't matter so much. What matters here is you see how big of a gap they have between their low back and the seat. That's the problem. And if you ever like watch somebody, I mean, if you can ever go to the gym again, if we're ever allowed to, watch somebody do a leg press or like a leg press on a leg press machine. But look at their sitting position. The majority of the time, you will see people doing a leg press and there's this big gap between their low back and the seat or the seat back. And that's essentially what you do the leg press to try to get full leg muscle recruitment in a safer position. So safer than say doing squats. If your back's like this though, you're doing even worse for you than you would if you did an incorrect squat. Because now you're putting all the stress on your back even when you're sitting down, which you don't want to do. This right here is the most important factor with maintaining low back health as far as ergonomics go. So it doesn't matter if I, recline back or even if I'm kind of leaning forward, I need to have contact with the back of my chair with my low back. A lot of people that do these kinds of things can really benefit from having a lumbar support because that lumbar support will stick out and that'll give you more support even if you don't have the perfect posture there. All right, so there's your ergonomics for you. Okay, sports here. I want to go straight into the pitching here. Now, volleyball spike is virtually the same mechanics as pitching minus the leg movement or minus the lower body movement. You still have really the same exact positioning in terms of arm cocking, arm acceleration, and follow through as you would with throwing a baseball or really throwing a football for that matter. All overhead throwing motions are mechanically the same, but you do some minor tweaks to them to really differentiate the nuance to it. So for example, if I'm throwing a football versus throwing a baseball, I have a little bit of changes in the actual arm movement, but the same basic principles apply. So with a football, you end up doing a lot more internal rotation than you do with a baseball, but at the same time, you are still doing the same general steps to do that. So there is 6 phases to throwing: wind up, early cocking, late cocking, acceleration, deceleration, follow through. So I want to walk you through these here real quick. Now, the internal rotation you have from throwing a baseball is the fastest movement you have in sports. So this can reach speeds of round about 8 to 12,000 RPM. What that means here is that when you go from, and I guess it'd be easier to show you from the side, if I'm going to throw, when I go from here to here, and I'm kind of still cut myself off. Yeah, don't let the screaming child in the background fool you. He's just getting a bath. All right, so when I go from here at external rotation to here at internal rotation, this movement is 8 to 12,000 RPMs. Pretty fast there. When you hit around that 8,000-ish mark, you're going at about 90 miles an hour. So that's how fast your arm rotates just to be able to throw. And remember, your 2 muscles that are going to prevent anterior displacement of your humerus while throwing that interlexural rotation is infraspinatus and teres minor, very small muscles, right? So it's no reason why you get injured there doing things like that. All right, so this is Araldus Chapman when he was throwing for Team Cuba. So this was, gosh, probably about 10 years ago when he was actually throwing this. But he is the hardest throwing pitcher in baseball history. So he's thrown over 105 miles an hour, which is, you know, pretty fast. To give you an idea, if you don't start your swing before a pitcher releases the ball, if they throw 97 miles an hour or harder, you cannot hit the ball fair. So what that means is if that pitcher has released the ball, even if it is just left his hand and I'm still in my stance and I haven't moved yet, if that ball is 97 miles an hour or faster, I cannot hit the ball fair because I will not be able to complete a swing and make contact with the ball in a trajectory that would go into fair territory. All right. Now, the windup, even though it's kind of a phase of throwing, it really isn't. All your windup really is getting to this position here. And the major thing with it is this is giving you your max hip flexion. That's just the big thing with that. Now, if you notice, when you actually separate, you want to hit the ground, which he's hitting right now. And you want to have your arm at max extension. Now you notice how his hips are still somewhat closed. So his belly button's still facing that way. His shoulders are straight in alignment. Now, both of his arms are in extension. So that's why you can see him going back like this. So he's in extension and adducting his scapula. Not a terrible thing to do, but it could, if his upper body doesn't stay in alignment or stay on time, he's going to have a lot of anterior shear force on his shoulder. Now, coming forward here, now he is in max external rotation. If you look at that arm, now he has a little bit of lean to him, and that's normal. But here's his elbow, there's the ball. He's virtually at 90 degrees of external rotation there. What that does, the more external rotation you get, the more time you have to speed up your arm, meaning that I have more distance I can speed up. So if you think about your car, and you talk about, like, say, a 0 to 60 speed, the longer duration you have to go, or the more time you have to go, the easier it is to get to 60. If I said you had 1 second to get to 60 miles an hour, the only cars that are gonna be able to do that are essentially gonna be like rocket propelled kind of thing, you know? So if I have now, let's say 4 seconds to be able to get to 60, virtually everyone can do it. That's the same thing that's happening here. Because his arm is in such great, or has such a big external rotation, he has all this time from here all the way to here to create speed. So you can improve pitching velocity substantially. And by substantially, I'm meaning like 5 to 7 miles an hour, if you can get somebody to have full external rotation, just because they can then have more time to generate more velocity. The other thing too is that you notice when he gets to that full external rotation, even before that, he has completely rotated his back foot. That's important because now that allows the kinetic chain to transfer energy upward. If his back foot were stuck against this here, he is going to be, regardless of everything else, he's going to be limited because he won't be able to effectively generate force going upward from his back leg, and in turn he won't have good trunk rotation, so you're going to lose a ton of speed that way. Now there you can see his hand is facing opposite, so his hand is actually turned outward like this. That is your max internal rotation there. It's very quick. So external rotation, internal rotation. That right there determines how fast you throw that ball. Now, with your follow through, it's only important in so much is that it allows you to dissipate energy. Once you release a baseball, or once you release any ball that you're throwing, you can no longer generate energy. I mean, it's gone. You know, the ball left your hand. There's nothing else you can do. But if you look at the physics behind it, you can't throw at full strength or at full speed if you try to slow yourself down. So if I try to, say, throw a ball and then stop at my release point, to be able to do that, I have to throw a lot slower, or else my arm's momentum is going to carry me forward. So the follow through is all meant to dissipate that forward moving energy. If you don't have a proper follow through, it just means that you have been inefficient on everything up to that point, meaning that you can throw harder because you're not working as hard as you need to slow or stop your body, because you're already slowing it before you release the ball. Other thing here is that your stride length should be round about, they have here 87% of a pitcher's height. Anywhere from 80 to 120 is acceptable. If you think about one of the easiest drills to do with a baseball pitcher is to improve or change their stride length, because you measure how tall they are, and then you measure from the mound forward that distance and mark it off, and you can then determine if their stride is too long, too short, or whatever. You want to have that stride close to your vertical height, just so that it gives you the most amount of distance that you can essentially move without mechanically losing any energy. If you go too long with your stride, you end up leaning too far forward and you lose more trunk rotation, meaning you lose speed on the ball. If you're too short, you haven't gained enough trunk rotation and you haven't gained enough forward flexion to give you your full velocity. So that is that there. All right. So that's really everything I wanted to talk about here today. If you guys have any questions, I will stick around until you all leave. If not, I will maybe see you guys next week. Remember, next week, you don't have to come to class if you don't want to. I'll be here. I'll send out a Zoom link for you. I will also be posting the Zoom recording for you in the announcements here in a little bit. So it usually takes about half hour for the video to compress and then download. So I will get that up for you there. So that'll be in the announcements today. And then, like I said, if you have any other questions, I will be here. If not, I will hopefully see you all next week.